You've seen the pictures, right? St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. It's gotta be one of the most recognizable buildings on Earth. But what if I told you that the magnificent structure we see today is really just the final chapter in a story that's 2,000 years in the making? A story built layer by layer, all on top of one incredibly sacred spot. So, to really understand this place, we have to dig a little deeper. Literally. We need to ask a simple question. What's underneath it all? Because the story of St. Peter's doesn't start with grand designs and famous architects. It starts with something way, way humbler.
So let's go all the way back, right down to the bedrock, to a single patch of ground that would, believe it or not, change the course of history.
You see, this whole thing, this massive jaw-dropping basilica, it all comes down to one person. According to a tradition that goes back centuries, the entire complex is built to honor the final resting place of St. Peter. The story goes that after his martyrdom in Rome, he was buried right here, on what was then just a hillside cemetery known as Vatican Hill. For a couple of centuries, it was just that, a simple grave. But then, around the year 320, everything changes. The Roman Emperor Constantine, the first one to embrace Christianity, decides this spot needs something, well, more. He literally carves away a huge chunk of Vatican Hill just to create a level foundation for a massive new church.
And this is what he built. This was the first St. Peter's Basilica. And for its time, it was absolutely enormous. It was a place of worship, sure, but it was also what's called a martyrium, a building specifically designed to mark a martyr's grave. And that's the whole point. The high altar, the focal point of the entire building, was placed directly over the traditional spot of Peter's tomb.
Okay, so fast forward 1,000 years. Constantine's Basilica stands for a millennium, becoming this revered center of pilgrimage. But 1,000 years is a long time. By the Renaissance, the grand old church is, well, it's literally falling apart. And a truly radical decision had to be made.
I mean, can you imagine that debate? Do you really tear down a 1,000-year-old sanctuary? Well, the popes of the Renaissance were nothing if not bold. They chose a new path. They didn't just want to repair the old church, they envisioned something even grander, a new basilica that would be the undisputed masterpiece of the Christian world.
Just look at the sheer ambition here. On the left, you've got Constantine's Basilica. Huge for its time, no doubt, but on the right, what we have today. The vision was to replace a legend with an absolute colossus. It was a project that would end up taking over 150 years and the minds of Italy's greatest artistic geniuses to pull off.
So, where do you even begin? Well, with the dome. The first major plan came in 1506 from an architect named Donato Bramante, and his idea was audacious, to say the least. He wanted to build a dome the size of the ancient Roman Pantheon, but instead of resting it on a thick, solid wall, he wanted to hoist it high into the air on just 4 massive pillars.
It's a breathtaking vision, right? Placing the heavens of the Pantheon over the tomb of St. Peter. Poetic. But there was one pretty critical make-or-break question. Could it actually be built without falling down? And the answer was a catastrophic no. Not even close. Modern analysis shows that Bramante's plan was fatally flawed. The immense weight and force would have just shoved those pillars outward, and the whole thing would have come crashing down. The dream almost died right there. It would take a whole line of other architects, including the great Michelangelo, to finally solve the engineering and give us the dome we know today. But here's where the story gets really incredible. While generations of architects were literally trying to figure out how to keep the roof from caving in, the art didn't stop. In fact, one of the basilica's most famous treasures was already finished.
That's right, Michelangelo's Pieta. He carved this masterpiece way back in 1499. That's 7 years before construction on the new basilica even started. It was originally made for a chapel inside the old Constantinian basilica. Just let that sink in for a second. This beloved statue is actually older than the building that houses it. It's like this beautiful bridge in time, surviving the demolition of one church to become the soul of the next.
Okay, let's jump forward now, over a century. The main structure is up, the dome is in place, but the interior, it's still missing its defining feature. It needs a heart. And that's when a new artistic genius arrives on the scene. His name was Gian Lorenzo Bernini, the absolute master of the Baroque style. And his job was to create a focal point worthy of this immense space, and, most importantly, worthy of the sacred tomb that lay right underneath it all. And this was his solution, the baldacchino.
It's this gigantic four-poster canopy cast in bronze, standing right under Michelangelo's dome. And crucially, it's directly over the high altar that marks the tomb of St. Peter. It's a stroke of genius. It visually connects the very top of the church with its very foundation.
Now, this was an absolutely epic undertaking. It took Bernini and his entire workshop a staggering 9 years to complete, from 1624 to 1633. 9 full years.
And to do it, they needed a mind-boggling amount of bronze, over 6,200 kilograms of it. So where do you get that much bronze? Well, famously, and pretty controversially, Pope Urban VIII allowed Bernini to strip the bronze from the ancient Roman pantheon, which led to a saying in Rome, "What the barbarians did not do, the Barberini did."
But the Baldacchino is so much more than just big and bronze. If you look closely, it's covered in symbols that tell a story of power, faith, and deep, deep history.
For instance, if you zoom in on the marble bases, you'll see these. Bees. Lots of bees. Well, that was the heraldic symbol of the Barberini family, the family of Pope Urban VIII. Bernini was essentially signing the work, not just for himself, but for his powerful boss.
And this is just brilliant. It really shows you the layers of history we're talking about. Why the twisted columns? Well, they were designed to look exactly like a set of spiral columns from the original Old St. Peter's. And tradition held that those columns had been brought to Rome from the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. So Bernini is physically connecting his new creation all the way back through the centuries, to the first Basilica and even to the Old Testament. Talk about a deep cut.
So, with the interior defined, there was just one final massive project left, that huge empty space out in front of the Basilica. Bernini was tasked with creating a grand entrance, a public square, that could finally hold the masses.
And his concept was deeply symbolic. As Bernini himself put it, he wanted the design to feel like the welcoming arms of the church, reaching out to embrace the faithful, the pilgrims, and really, the entire world.
And this is the final result. A vast, breathtaking space defined by 2 sweeping colonnades. So the next time you see this iconic image, remember the journey we've been on. You're not just looking at magnificent architecture. You're seeing the end of a 2,000-year story that starts with a humble grave, gets monumentalized by an emperor, nearly collapses under its own ambition, and is ultimately perfected by the greatest artists in history. So let me ask you, how does knowing